All right, so agricultural land assessments. Today we will be, if I can get my computer screen to work properly. There we go. Oops, let me back up one slide. There we go. Sorry about that. Today we will be reviewing the Indiana Code 6-1.1-4-13, which covers agricultural land assessments. We'll be talking about valuing agricultural land. We'll be discussing frequently asked questions, various resources, and then questions. If you were hoping today to get the agricultural land base rate for the January 1st, 2021 assessment date, unfortunately, we do not have that yet. We are still waiting on some information from the federal government, but we will hopefully have that memo and the base rate ready to disseminate by January 1st. So for those of you that know me, I frequently will refer to either the Indiana Code or the Indiana Administrative Code. And today we're going to focus on Indiana Code 6-1.1-4-13. I will not bore you and read through a lot of the code citations. I will make various code references. But the first screen, as you can see here, talks about agricultural land. And the key phrase here is that land shall be assessed as agricultural land only when it is devoted to agricultural use. It could include land enrolled in a conservation or reserve program administered by the United States Department of Agriculture, or the Agricultural Farm Services Agency. It can also include land enrolled in the Indiana Department of Natural Resources Classified Forest and Wildlands Program, and land classified in the category of other agricultural use as provided in our real property assessment guidelines. As you can see, here is a list of various uses of land, such as livestock, poultry, timber, grains, and all those other uses listed. However, it is not limited to just those uses. There could be potentially other uses for agricultural properties. A key thing for agricultural use is that land size of a parcel does not determine whether or not it is agricultural use or not. The United States Department of Agriculture has soil survey data that it's available, and that includes the soil productivity factors for various types of soils. All assessing officials and PDBOs shall, not may, but shall use the data to determine the true tax value of agricultural land. And a few years ago, there was this tied in with the 2011/2012 reassessment. There was a proposed change in soil productivity factors that we had used, and the legislature made the determination that we would use the current or the existing soil productivity factors. As you can see, the department shall, by rule, provide for the method of determining the true tax value of each parcel of agricultural land. And this section does not apply to land purchased for industrial or commercial uses. There are a couple of references. One is the United States Department of Agricultural's Farm Service Agency. You can see the link to their website, as well as the National Resources Conservation Service. So how do we value agricultural land? Basically, it starts with the assessment formula that identifies agricultural tracts using data from detailed soil maps, aerial photography, and local plat maps. The main thing here is to ensure uniformity in the assessment of the agricultural land through the use of the maps and data. In our guidelines, real property guidelines, chapter 2, starting on page 76 is where we use or determine the valuation of agricultural land. Basically, as you can see, the equation, the market value of agricultural land is calculated by dividing the net income of each acre by the appropriate capitalization rate. In other words, the DLGF comes up with the base rate. One of the questions that we frequently receive is, what's the difference between residential acreage tracts and land valued using the agricultural soil productivity method? As you can see, agricultural land is using the statewide base rate and a soil productivity index. Residential land is land that is utilized or zoned for residential purposes. Another concern that comes up is the agricultural land enrolled in the Farm Services Agency, and they receive a farm number. Those taxpayers that have their agricultural land or their land enrolled in through the USDA and receive a farm number would be receiving the agricultural base rate. As I indicated a few minutes ago, the issue of the parcel size has no bearing on the appropriate classification of pricing the method of agricultural land. In our guidelines, we give several different classification codes or types for land. As you can see, classified land, tillable land, non-tillable, woodland, other farmland, agricultural support land, and home site. Type 2 classified land is that land that has been applied for and approved for specific programs administered by the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. A 100% influence factor deduction applies to classified land. And within that, there's a table for different types of classified land: classified forest, wildlands, windbreak, and filter strip. Type 4 tillable land includes land that is used for cropland or pasture and has no impediments to routine tillage. You can see it can be used for corn, soybeans, wheat, rotation pasture, and hay. It could also include vegetables, other crops, idle cropland, trees or land use for Christmas tree plantations, and nurseries. There are different types of tillable land subtypes. The first one you can see is type 41, which is land occasionally flooded, which occurs 2 to 4 times a year in a 10-year period. A 30% influence factor is applied to this type. Type 42 has a little bit more frequency in the flooding, and a 50% influence factor is determined for this type. Type 43 is for farmed wetlands. As you can see, this type of land only applies to areas of contiguous land measuring 2.5 acres or more, and this must be verified through the records obtained through the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Farm Services Agency. A 50% influence factor deduction is applied. Here are 2 links for the Farm Wetlands Program and the state offices for the USDA, Indiana. For non-tillable land, this is land that's covered with brush or scattered trees, and it has less than a 50% canopy cover. A 60% influence factor deduction applies to non-tillable land. Type 6 is woodland, and woodland is land supporting trees capable of producing timber or other wood products. It has a 50% or more canopy cover and is a permanently planted reforested area. And this would be typically done through the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. An 80% influence factor applies. A wooded parcel of land less than 10 acres may be assessed using the agricultural soil productivity method. In addition, as you can see, smaller than 10-acre parcels that are not contiguous with other wooded parcels under the same ownership may qualify as agricultural. One of the key things, as I indicated earlier, was a farm number or program designed to foster timber production management. One of the key things when looking at whether or not the land should be assessed is agricultural land or other types of land. As I indicated, it comes down to the use as well as what is the purchase of the land, what is the intended use. The assessing official may want to look at other things such as the acreage designated by the DNR as qualifying for one of their classified programs. Please note the DNR has a 10-acre minimum for its programs. Also, can the owner show an active timber management program in place? As you can see, the other two requirements there for possessing the DNR management plan and that the owner can show a regular forest harvest have occurred over a long period of time. There are other types of farmland. Type 71 is used for farm buildings and barn lots. One of the FAQs we'll talk about in a few minutes involves hog operations like hog farms, and how do you assess the land under the hog farm buildings. As you can see, the value for this is there is a 40% influence factor deducted for this type of property. For land that is type 72, it's covered by, say, a farm pond or running water. There's a productivity factor of 0.50 and a 40% influence deduction. Type 73 involves 2.5 acres of contiguous acres of land designated by the USDA as wetlands. This must be verified through the USDA. As you can see, the value is determined using a productivity factor of 0.50 and a 40% influence factor deduction. A legal ditch, which is type 81, is used and occupied as part of a legal drainage ditch and is considered to have no value, and it is deducted from the total acreage parcel. Type 82 is a public road. The right-of-way area is dedicated for public roads, is deducted from the total parcel acreage. The key thing is that it must be a dedicated public road and not a private road. If you have land that has a public utility transmission tower, this area is typically going to be about 1/8 of an acre, and it is deducted from the parcel acreage. The transmission line right away is assessed according to the land use of the acreage, and it is not deducted from the parcel acreage. As far as type 9 or home site, this is 1 acre per dwelling on an agricultural property is classified as agricultural home site land. So if you think of a farm and say it's a 1,000-acre farm, the 1 acre that is dedicated or used for the home site will be classified as that 1 acre home site. As far as agricultural excess acreage, this is something that's typically not used or associated with the non-agricultural use normally associated with the home site. So if you think of a large manicured yard, that would meet this qualification or meet this classification. The agricultural excess acreage rate is the same rate that is established for residential excess acreage, and this is determined by the local assessing official. Hopefully you're doing this as part of your cyclical reassessment. At least once during the 4-year cyclical reassessment, the county assessor, in cooperation with the PETABOA, should establish a land base rate and the land order, and the land order would include the residential excess acreage rate, which would then also be the agricultural excess rate. As far as soil maps go, agricultural land, as we talked about, it has a formula where you're valuing the farmland in part based on the productivity of the parcel soil. The more productive the land is, it's going to be assessed obviously higher than less productive land. As you can see, detailed soil maps are published by the USDA. And it shows where the different soils are located within the landscape of the property. And it discusses the various types of soil characteristics. As you can see, there are different types of things that go into the soil series, such as soil layering, drainage, water holding capacity, organic matter content, and other characteristics. They have various names such as Miami, Crosby, Fox, and Brookston. The poorly, as you can see, for example, the poorly drained Brookston series is generally found in depressions of wide or flat areas. And these are done on a national basis. There are some things that obviously go into the soil types and soil properties, such as the depth, water holding capacity. Not all soils are categorized in a particular soil series and they're not exactly alike. So each soil series is further subdivided into soil map units. And after they are subdivided, there could be various things that contribute to that soil type, such as the subsurface texture, slope class, and previous erosion. So hopefully everyone has soil maps in your jurisdiction, and soil scientists will draw lines around each soil map using aerial photography to determine where does the soil change. There are approximately 2,400 soil map units in Indiana, and each has a soil productivity rating. As you can see, the rating is based on the average estimated crop yields, which in turn are based on the physical properties of the soil, such as the slope, moisture, drainage, depth of rooting, organic matter content, and other characteristics. In Indiana, the soil productivity ratings are based on corn yield estimates. And these are the most convenient and reliable estimates since no other crop is grown on a wider range in Indiana. And this is based on a 10-year average. The estimate of the corn yields comes from Purdue University and the USDA. As you can see, the soil productivity ratings reflect the yield differences caused by the properties of the soil and not crop management or decisions made by agricultural producers. As you can see further that the amount is calculated by dividing the estimated 10-year average corn yield in bushels per acre by 100. Productivity factors do not accurately predict the actual yields for a particular year, since the weather has a great influence on actual yields. It could be years where there's drought, it could be years where there's flooding. The best way to think of soil productivity index for soil properties or soils is to think that the higher the rating, the higher the productivity of the soil, the higher the rating. The highest is 1.28, and the poorest soil has a productivity of 0.50. So if you look at Indiana, generally the north central part of the state, Lafayette over to Kokomo, over to Muncie, that area is going to have some of the highest productivity soils in the state compared to maybe the southwest part of the state or southeast part of the state, where maybe this soil is maybe a little bit more sandy and doesn't have as much productivity. As far as valuing strip mined agricultural land, if coal has been strip mined, the assessor must apply a special productivity factor to that land. And as you can see, for land strip mined on or before December 31st, 1977, the productivity factor is 0.75. And for anything after December 31st, 1977, the productivity factor is 0.68. As we talked about, there are different types of agricultural land use types. I won't bore you and read all the different types, but you can see that, and these are in our guidelines for reference. There are various influence factors given, and as you can see, the chart that shows the corresponding use type and the deductions. These are guidelines by our office. Is there ever a chance where somebody could, a taxpayer, for example, could appeal their assessment and say, instead of a 40% influence factor, I think I should get a 60% influence factor? That certainly is a possibility, but much like with anything with the appeal process, it would be up to the taxpayer to be able to show, here's why I believe my assessment's incorrect, and here's why I think I should have a different influence factor applied. For the January 1st, 2020 assessment date, the agricultural base rate is $1,280 per acre. As I indicated at the start of the program, it is expected that we will have the January 1st, 2021 agricultural base rate to be released by the end of this month. So with that, I will turn the program over to Steve McKinney, who's our field rep, and he's going to share and talk about various frequently asked questions. Steve?
Good morning. One of the first questions on our PowerPoint is, how are large tracts of land not being timbered used for recreation to be assessed? And our answer is based on the description of the property. When a woodland is used primarily for residential purposes, for recreation, privacy buffers, wildlife viewing, etc., that woodlot should be assessed as residential or residential excess acreage. Remember that use is the key and not the size of the parcel. Now, as we go through other frequently asked questions, there's going to be a common theme or scenario. So as we go on through this morning, there will be more added to this slide for your consideration. So next slide. How is land used for large livestock operations assessed, as ag land or commercial? And what about that modern hog and dairy farm? And there's different sides of the Indiana codes that we consider, and we'll start out with really the land where the livestock is grazing. That would be pasture land, and that would be assessed as agricultural land. But then there's this section of the Indiana codes that defines agricultural machinery as being used in the direct production of agricultural commodities. And then there's another section of the Indiana codes that defines agricultural commodities as being a plant or a part of a plant, and animals or animal products produced primarily for the sale of consumption by humans or animals. And next slide. And then this is the big slide for that question, because this Indiana code defines an agricultural operation. And the question originally was, how do we handle large livestock operations? And this defines an agricultural operation as being used in the production of crops, livestock, poultry, livestock products, poultry products, or horticultural products, or for growing timber. And our current policy that Barry just talked a little bit ago is that the use is the key, and it doesn't matter if the size of the parcel is 5 acres or 10 acres or whatever amount. The use is the key. that same theory could apply for the farmer who raises 50 head of hog or 5,000 head of hog or any type of particular type of livestock for that matter. So we just don't separate between the size of the farm. And so now this slide continues on with that frequently asked question. And what if a farmer raises a hog and then butchers it, sells it, and makes sausage out of it, and sells it to the local retailer to sell for them? And so every now and then we get that type of a question, and I teach about this when I teach tax abatement classes around the state. So this is a frequently asked question we get. And basically, you've got a live hog, and that's an agricultural commodity. But 5 minutes later, that hog is slaughtered and begins the process of being butchered and converted into some other type of product. And so that's where you draw the line. The live hog for that farmer is an agricultural operation. When he takes it into the building and starts to butcher it, that's a commercial enterprise, a commercial operation. And that's where the land use would change from an agricultural use to a industrial or commercial use. That same theory applies if the farmer has his own milk, and then while he has that milk, he converts it into ice cream or cheese. So there's a line there where the cow is being milked, and that's an agricultural operation. But then all of a sudden, the milk gets pumped into another building, and the process to make it into a cheese or a dairy product or ice cream or whatever would change that use of the land there. This same example or theory would be the same for the farmer that grows his own corn, but then he puts some of it into a building and he bags or he cleans it, coats it with a purple fungicide, and bags it. So that's an entirely separate process from the agricultural operation. So it is possible for a person to grow an agricultural commodity and then convert it into a different type of product and sell it. And that's where we draw the line between an agricultural operation and a commercial enterprise. Next slide, please. Are there any updates or changes for 2021 that we can expect? And what is the new ag land base rate? And as Larry mentioned earlier, we plan on releasing that around December 31st of this year. I'm actually working on it right now. I'm going to submit it to Barry this Friday, and then Jenny Banks does her magic with it and makes my rough draft look so much better. And so there's a process once I submit my rough draft to Indianapolis, and they go through it with a fine-tooth comb and approve it, and then our commissioner will issue that 2-page certification letter that he does every year. And then we also have that 70-page packet of information, the resource materials that make up that number for the people that want to learn more about how that number is created. Next slide, please. I would like clarification regarding properties that have horses for recreational purposes. How can that land be designated as ag land? And our answer is each situation would be reviewed separately. There have been several IBTR cases that address the use of the land and differentiating between agricultural land, residential land, things like that. I'll continue on this theme with the answer being continued. The law does not indicate how many animals it takes to reclassify land from residential to agricultural. Horses used for recreational purposes, 4-H animals, hobby farms, family vegetable gardening plots are all topics related to these questions on where do you draw the line between when something is no longer agricultural and should be converted to residential. And there's no clear place to draw the line and no single fact or indicator used to make this determination. A lot of times it's a whole series of facts for a particular parcel. And you have to consider the different facts and the wide variety of scenarios and and give that consideration. On this, let's go back one slide for a second, please. Concerning the language in that slide on the law doesn't require how many animals it takes to reclassify the land or how many horses they should own. Every now and then I get a county that says, well, we think if they have 5 or less horses, they're not a farmer. And if they have 6 or more horses, then they are a farmer. And that kind of logic ties into the same as, well, if they only have 5 acres or 10 acres or something, I'm not going to allow it. You really can't put a number on it. And a court case or an IBTR decision I like that ties into this slide, it was issued in June of 2014. The IBTR ruled on the Hearth versus Dearborn County case. And let me read. Let's find that real quick. And in that Hearth versus Dearborn case issued on June of 2014, it talks about the law does not indicate how many verses of Old MacDonald it takes to reclassify the land from agricultural from residential to agricultural for assessment purposes. And so there's all these different cases where they have 3 horses or 5 horses, or a hobby garden, or they raise a few chickens or a pet rabbit and things like that. And then the size of the land matters too. I mean, sometimes the people, I saw one IBTR decision where it was 1.4 acres, and they were trying to get the 0.4 acres to be taxed as agricultural instead of residential, and they lived in a housing addition and things like that. So these are all good comments and examples for your consideration on how it's so fact sensitive, and there's not a one size fits all answer and things like that. And on this slide, we're talking about a particular IBTR ruling, and it talks about how the board cannot find any support for the proposition that an agricultural classification depends solely on whether the property is actively farmed. So some people say that if not growing corn or soybeans on it, then it's not an agricultural operation. But no, the agricultural designation goes so much farther than that. Will there be any changes or updates, factors? And no, this question we talked about earlier. And so no, the updates are just going to come as they come. The most common update you're going to see pertaining to this question will be IBTR decisions, as the IBTR hears these appeals and they hear the evidence presented by both parties, and they make a ruling on it. On that topic, I have seen IBTR decisions where the assessor walks the IBTR through the process on how they determined a particular taxpayer's acreage as being tillable or non-tillable, or whether it was residential or agricultural. And they describe the steps that they take to calculate the assessment. They talk about how the DLGF comes up with that annual base rate, and then they apply the applicable soil productivity factors. And they talk about applying the negative influence factors for it being along the road or having a ditch through it or whatever. And so if you go before the IBTR on one of these types of appeals, you really need to think about walking in there and being prepared to walk them through step by step by step on everything you do to come up with that assessment. Every now and then I see where, I had one IBTR decision where the property owner said that they cash rented a part of their land, but another part of their land they just used for hiking and camping and ATV riding, and they hunted on it. And then to promote the woods as being agricultural, they said that it prevented soil erosion and improved water quality, and they were being environmental stewards for wildlife. And the assessor failed to challenge or rebut that evidence given by the property owner. So the BTR said for those reasons that the assessor failed to present any evidence to rebut the evidence presented by the property owner, that they had to find in favor of the property owner. So every now and then we have different situations where one assessor will go through the steps and take the time to challenge things, while another assessor might say, well, this is the way we do it for everybody in the whole county, and we're uniform in that way. But they really don't go into the details on how they do anything. This slide talks about how someone files a woodland management program in 2015, but now the property is sold, and should they remove that ag classification for the new owner, and would it require the new owner to file a new management plan under their name? And our answer is, if the property is transferred, the use and classification does not necessarily need to remain the same. However, the Indiana codes provide that if the assessor does change the classification, they must provide notice of the change to the taxpayer, and the assessor has the burden of proof with that change. And so that court case where each year stands alone is an important concept. So as property sells from one party to another party, each year stands alone, and if the assessor sees a change in the use, the assessor can definitely change that assessment and that classification. But if the use continues to remain the same, then its local control allows them to consider the facts and make a decision accordingly. This slide talks about the new statutory language on the burden of proof on the assessor in a review when the land classification is changed. And so, back one slide, please. And so it just began on assessments occurring after February 28th of 2015. So it hasn't been around for a very long time, but just know that if you change somebody from residential to agricultural, that the burden of proof is on you as the assessor to defend that ruling, and it's not on the taxpayer or the property owner. Next slide, please. We're finding it difficult to determine whether hobby farms and small-scale gardens, a taxpayer with a garden on a parcel, fits the definition of agricultural land. Land devoted to the horticultural or nursery stock, fruits, vegetables, does the size of the parcel or part of that parcel devoted may not be the determinant. We are seeking clarity on whether an owner whose land is devoted to farming or gardening primarily for pleasure as opposed to for profit, and should in fact receive the benefits of the ag land base rate regardless of that. And for that question, let's see. I need to turn a couple pages on my script. I've been gabbing and not following through with that. And on that question, our answer is each situation should be reviewed separately, the specific use of the property and the specific use of the property. If you do not believe it should be assessed as agricultural land, that is your prerogative. And if the taxpayer does not agree with your assessment, then they can file an appeal. And so it's fact sensitive, case specific, local control prevails, and we would encourage you to be fair and equitable and uniform in your approach. And then it mentions IBTR decision websites. And once again, for this question, I recommend that you look at that Hearth versus Dearborn County decision in June of 2014. Especially this year, the pandemic. When the pandemic hit last spring, there was a large number of people that started gardening and raising chickens in their backyards because there was a fear that there might be a shortage in the food supply. So there was a large number of people that started gardening this year because of the pandemic, and they started raising chickens to produce their own eggs and their own meat. That happened this year. And does that automatically make them a farmer? And so this Hearth versus Dearborn County case may be very relevant for you to consider for January 1st of 2021, with the large increase in people that started vegetable gardening and raising poultry. And so just something to consider. Next slide, please. My father is a farmer in County X, and I'm trying to help him find the answer to a question concerning woods he owns. The question is, what percentage of the woods must have tree coverage to qualify that piece of property as a woods? And Barry talked about this earlier in his presentation, and he talked about how part of the property tax assessment process, land that has at least 50% canopy cover or is permanently planted reforested area can receive that 80% influence factor. Now, this language is for land that's being assessed as agricultural. So those influence factors would not apply to residential type properties. Additionally, the DNR has classified forest and wildlife programs. Now, this addition to that previous question starts a whole new topic and a whole new series, because it gets into the classified land program that we have for forests and wildlands and filter strips and windbreaks and things like that. And so next slide, please. So basically that slide gives you a few particulars on what might qualify for it. So when people want to participate in this classified land program, the state agrees to see that their assessed value is reduced and taxed less if they agree to this program and participation in the program and things like that. Next slide, please. Eligible lands may be either native forest and containing the 40 square feet of basal area per acre and things like that. So this slide just talks about some of the particulars that they need to participate in the program. Next slide. The Indiana codes actually, there's an Indiana code site for each one of these different types of land classification programs. And it's important to look up the Indiana code site, whether it's a filter strip program or a windbreak program or the wildlife program or whatever type program. There is a section in the Indiana codes for each one of those programs, and it gives the particulars and the requirements that they have to do for each one of those programs. So a frequently asked question we get on this classified land topic is this something that the assessor automatically applies to the parcels that qualify for this classification, or does the property owner need to enroll in this program if desired? And the answer is the statutes contain the requirements for participation in the program, and there are even penalties when the property owner decides to withdraw from that program. So the assessor should not automatically be doing anything on this classified land program. If you think that somebody is entitled to that classified land program, you would not just automatically give it to them because they're not entitled to it, because they haven't asked to be a part of that program. And there are penalties when they stop meeting all the requirements for it, where we go back 10 years and collect 10 years worth of tax payments on that land when they take it out of the program. So it's important to understand that not everybody automatically gets this land classification designation. We have a memo that we put out each year for the land classified rates. I just updated it this morning and provided it to Barry as a rough draft, so he can start to look at that. And I think that the 2021 memo will be issued late December, early January, like it typically has been done. But there's a history of those classified land rates per acre, and the 2021 rate will be released in the very near future. Next slide, please. On the topic of resources on agricultural land, we talked about appeals and how the assessor needs to walk the IBTR through the assessment process. And a lot of assessors will give this certification, this 2-page certification letter as evidence. Some will give the 70-page resource material packet as evidence. And so here are links to the last 3 years of those, and then below is a link to the memo for the assessment rate for the various years. And so those are excellent resources for you to consider as part of your appeals evidence that you're going to submit. Now for questions. Barry, I'll have you jump back in and we'll take a look at these questions together. There's coal mining in Indiana? Question mark. Is this in the southern part of the state? And yeah, they don't do much coal mining in the northern half of the state, so that was all down south, I'm thinking. I don't know if Barry can add more comments about coal mining in Indiana or not.
Nope, I think you've covered it pretty well, Steve, and certainly the environment and a push to more clean energy. Certainly, the coal industry has come under attack, but yes, there are still coal operations in southwestern part of the state. In fact, I read where a coal mining company just declared bankruptcy, I believe, last week. So it does exist.
The next question. Oh, okay, yeah, I thought so too, and I know that it really destroyed the land, so to speak, and so they had to repair the land, and there are a lot of programs to repair the land after the coal mines closed down. Next question: how can the land for 2 horses that are for recreational purposes? There is no commodity for this livestock. And how can this be considered ag land, especially when the market shows that these types of parcels are selling for much more than the ag land base rate? And you can see that the farmland is selling more than the ag land base rate, whether they're growing corn, soybeans on it, or whether they're raising horses or hobby gardening and raising rabbits on it for 4-H and things like that. So basically, the Indiana Code sets the value and the calculations for the ag land base rate, and part of it is the lifestyle that they've talked about, the lifestyle of the farmer, and some of the rate is based on the lifestyle of the farmer, like that. So it's not all just what that acre of land can sell for when it comes to the ag land base rate. But basically, the answer to the question is it's in the Indiana codes, and that's how we are to set that rate, and we're just complying with the Indiana code.
The next question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Steve, I was going to jump in. The next question is, how would we as assessors go about getting more clarification, especially for horses, in terms of ag versus res? Obviously, that's a very good question. I don't know if there's a single source that you can point to. Certainly, as Steve referenced, there are IBTR decisions. I think the Faber decision from Boone County gives an example. Each case or each situation is going to be certainly different. The main thing we would urge is certainly for the assessing official to be fair and uniform and equitable in their treatment of farmland, especially when it comes to ag versus residential land. Maybe the assessing official determines a standard operating procedure saying that, in our county, if we have this type of land and this type of use, this is how we're going to treat it. If that involves horses, not horses. Steve referenced in the FAQs, are there number of horses? The case he referenced, the number of horses, or what if you have 2 horses? What if they're involved in 4-H or other recreational purposes? So again, it really comes down to case by case, and there's no set place where you could get clarification other than looking at IBTR decisions and to see if your situation or your case maybe fits into something like that. Steve, did you have anything you'd want to share about that question?
No, I think we've talked about it quite a bit. It's going to be fact sensitive and case specific, and a certain number of horses is not the sole determining factor. It's going to be the forest and not the tree kind of evidence.
Okay, the next question is how are 41 and 42, assuming land types 41 determined, does the property owner need to report that? The assessor is responsible for determining the land classification. As I referenced earlier, if the taxpayer does not agree with their assessment, they have the right to file an appeal. And so if you have it assessed one way and a taxpayer can bring proof or documentation in that shows that, hey, this land floods more frequently, especially it seems like the past several years there have been more and more floods and everything. Can the taxpayer bring evidence or documentation to substantiate or support their contentions that it should be getting a higher influence factor? So the assessor is responsible for the initial assessment, and much like anything, if the taxpayer disagrees, they have the right to file an appeal. Steve, any thoughts on that one?
No, I think you've covered it fine.
Okay.
The taxpayer can always offer evidence if they disagree with the assessor's findings on the level of flooding that occurs on a property.
Okay. Next question, 40 acre agricultural tract, 15 acres are woods, not used for anything, and the rest is tillable. Does the 15 acres go to 92 and not 6? Good question. Steve, any thoughts on that one? I mean,
yeah, I'm assuming that it's just a 40-acre tract out in the middle of nowhere, and there's not a house on this property. A lot of times we'll see a 40-acre tract, and there's little pocket woods in the corner. Typically, the woods is on a sand hill, so to speak, and the productivity on a sand hill just isn't enough that they've ever bothered farming it, so they just let it go to woods. And so frequently, when I see a 40-acre tract and 15 acres of it is woods, the woods is either on a sand hill or a wet spot that floods out on them, so they just let it go to woods and they don't bother farming it. So there's and like I say, I'm assuming that there's no house involved with this where they live in that 15 acres of woods and they're using the woods for any other purpose. But this question just seems to be, it's a 40-acre tract out in the middle of a lot of farm ground. There's no house on this property, and it's just 15 acres of woods. And typically what I see is that 15 acres is on low productivity soil and not worth bothering cleaning the woods up and making that land tillable and useful. And so a lot of times they give it the woods types of adjustments and the influence factors that it would get.
Okay, we're getting close to our ending time, so we'll end with this one question. Are you saying that the part of the code that says land purchase for commercial does not apply to large hog farms? They are buying 5-acre to 10-acre tracts for just their hog operations. Steve covered in the FAQ, it really comes back to what is the use of the land. I mentioned, when a property is purchased, what is their intended use for that land, and certainly it could change. But the hog farm operation, what are they doing with that part of the land? Is it where the hogs are, out in the mud and eating, or is it, part of the operations in terms of, the processing of the hogs? Steve, do you want to add anything to that last question?
Yeah, a lot of times these 5-acre and 10-acre tracts, they're either raising pigs from birth to feeder weight, and then they sell the feeder pigs off to somebody else to take them from feeder category to market weight. And so those are the two kinds of operations that I see, is where baby pigs are being born and they raise them up to a market weight or a feeder weight. It's like 40 pounds, let's say, and I don't know if that's an accurate weight or not, but they raise them up from being born to that feeder pig, and then they sell them off to somebody else to finish raising them. And then other people buy the feeder pigs and raise them to market weight. And so basically, you've got a living pig, whether it's born and raised to 40 pounds, or whether that pig is 40 pounds and they're going to take it up to market weight, let's say 200 pounds. That's just a living hog, and it's a livestock commodity. And then they take a semi-load of those hogs off to the slaughterhouse, because they don't slaughter them or process them on site. And they just take those live hogs, load them up in a semi, and haul them off to a slaughterhouse to be processed. That's really an agricultural operation by definition of statute. And so if they want to try and turn it into a commercial operation, the taxpayer can file it through the appeals process, but I would think that property owner, that business, would challenge it, and they would use these code sites saying this is an agricultural operation, whether we raise 50 hogs or 5,000 hogs. And so, but that's what we put in writing on that slide.
Okay.
And I agree with it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Steve, for helping to co-present this webinar. As you can see, the contact information for myself is listed there, as well as for Steve, and our website information. If you have any further questions, please either contact Steve or myself, or we will keep the chat bar open for a few more minutes. We will be sending out, after this presentation, probably in the next few days, Jenny Banks will be sending out a follow-up email with a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, as well as this webinar is eligible for 1 hour of continuing education credits. You will be sending out the continuing education form. So we'd like to thank you for your participation, and we wish everyone a happy holiday season. Thank you, everyone.